Good day. Today we will continue talking about pests and diseases. And under pests and diseases, weeds are also considered a pest. So I will talk about weed identification and management. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to, first of all, understand the importance of weeds. But before you do so, you need to we will define what a weed is. We will then move on to identify some common weeds in the garden, and we will discuss some of their uses. And then finally, we'll review some of the non-chemical approaches to weed management. So first of all, what is a weed? A weed is a plant growing where it is not wanted. In most texts, this will be the major definition. So it's growing where they are not wanted, plants out of place. Other textbook definitions will redefine it as being competitive, persistent, and sometimes noxious. It's even described as being invasive, very invasive. Even in the Bible, it is mentioned in Genesis 3:17 to 18, that curses the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. Another reference to weeds in Matthew 7:16 says that ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs, or thistles? And again in Isaiah 34 verses 13, and thorns shall come up in her places, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof. And even Jesus spoke of weeds in his parables in Matthew 13:18 to 23. Right? So as we move on in terms of the importance of weeds. Now, globally, there are around 250,000 different plant species. And of these plant species, only 0.1% or 250 of the total plants in the world are major problem weeds. And from this, only 25 species or 0.01 species may cause problems in any one particular crop, right? What are some of the characteristics that makes weeds so successful? First of all, weeds are fast growing. They're extremely prolific in that they produce a lot of seeds. And that sometimes is dependent on whether they are annuals or perennials. Because what we find is that annuals produce more seeds as a survival mechanism over perennials, which produce sometimes less seed, but in addition to that, they have an additional vegetative organ, which may be tubers, or they might have runners, or some other root habit that will enable it to survive. Weeds are also easily spread through a variety of dispersal mechanisms. What are some of these dispersal mechanisms? Wind. Wind is one of the most significant dispersal mechanisms, as weeds sometimes develop over time different appendages which will enable it to move from one area to the next. As you can see in this one here, in this picture here, the weeds seeds have different appendages like parachutes that will enable it to glide in the wind and move over several miles from one place to the next. Water. Some weed species have weed seeds that are very buoyant, and they could float in the water, and they could be moved for several distances, several meters away. Crop seeds. Sometimes crop seeds, when they're harvested, they may be contaminated with weed seeds. And sometimes when we buy these in the agri shops, they are already contaminated. We will talk about this sometime later as well. And tillage implements, because the tires and the implements themselves, they could move in the soil that remains on them several seeds, the seeds of a lot of number of different species of weeds, and they can move from one field to the next. And of course, harvest operations. But what is of much significance is man. A study showed that in one boot alone, they removed soil that contained as many as 250 different weed species. And think about in terms of this moving from one place to the next. And because certain weed species have certain appendages, for example, there's one by the name of burrgrass, it could remain on the soil, it could adhere, in fact, to your clothing and move from one place to the next. All right, as you see in this picture here, on the socks of this individual, there are some seeds that could remain from the burrs that would stick, enable it to stick on the clothing. The fur of animals, all right, and the burrs I was talking about, I don't know if you're familiar with this particular weed species. We will look at it a little later on. This particular weed species has burrs. It's referred to as burrgrass, and this could remain and stick onto the fur of the foraging animal. Now, why are weeds so significant? Weeds are significant sometimes because they harbor certain pest and disease problems, all right? In fact, what I didn't mention earlier is the fact that weeds are highly underestimated pests, right? In North America alone, they spend billions of dollars annually, much more money that they spend in the management of other insect pests and diseases, right? The majority of the money goes into the development of different herbicides and different weed management strategies. However, weeds, as I said, are very underestimated. But the thing about it is that weeds harbor specific pests and diseases. In this picture here, I'm showing a very common weed that we know around our backyards and in our environs by the name of whitetop, Parthenium hysteropterus. This weed harbors not only this caterpillar, which you are familiar with, affecting your brassicas, things like cabbage and broccoli. It is referred to as the diamondback moth. Diamondback moth, Protella xylostella, all right? This weed also harbors white flies, which may be a problem in your solanaceous crops like tomato and sweet pepper. And remember, if you recall, I did a session earlier where I mentioned to you that the white flies transmit a virus. They're sucking insects and they transmit a virus to your solanaceous crops, which will be evident at the top of the plant where you see that yellowing or that mottling effect. All right. Other weeds that cause problems. This is a very common weed in banana. This is a weed by the name of watergrass, or wandering dew, it is called in some instances, Commonina diffusa. This weed harbors a number of different nematodes. But the nice thing about this weed is that it forms a very nice cover of the soil. And it's a weed that you find in most Eastern Caribbean islands where banana is grown because it is a shade-tolerant weed. It grows prostrate and it covers the soil very quickly because the runners quickly spread and take take over. And in so doing, it serves as a sort of cover crop, protecting the soil from soil erosion. But at the same time, it harbors two very difficult to control root nematodes, right? And these nematodes cause severe problems in bananas. As you'll see in this picture here, this banana has toppled over as a result of nematodes in the soil. All right, and these nematodes, they affect the primary and the secondary roots of the banana. And as such, it sort of interferes with the structural integrity of the plant and enables, and eventually what you find is that it will topple over when you have high winds. Now, nematodes they are free-living worms and they're very minuscule. It's very difficult to see them with the naked eye. But the root-boring ones and the root reniform nematodes, they are serious problems. Now, weeds also have adverse effects on human beings and even on animals, because some of them, for example, are poisonous. All right, I don't know if you know this weed. This is a weed that causes, this is castor weed or castor plant. This is where you extract castor oil and all those things from. But it could be quite toxic if it's left in the field of a foraging animal. Over time, it bioaccumulates in the animal, and it may cause death. All right, so it injures animals. Here are some examples of some of the weeds, and I will show you pictures of them in a while. The Crotalaria, lantana, the nightshades. These actually injure people. And I'm not too sure if you're familiar with an attack that took place in Japan several years ago, where a compound by the name of racine was released. Racine, a gas, an invisible gas, was released into a train station by some terrorists in Japan. Right? It was actually a compound that was extracted from this plant, racine. And you find that as little as 10 milligrams can kill a 200-pound man in no time at all. All right, some other toxic plants that you'll have to avoid, things like Crotalaria. Crotalaria, which is also known as shak weed. All right, all parts of this plant is poisonous. Now, it is also used as, it is good as a cover crop, but the green or dry seeds are mostly toxic to horses, to swines, cattle, chickens. All right. Some of the symptoms that you may find in the animal is it'll be very uncoordinated. You'll see jaundice, acute jaundice occurring, all right, and eventually the animal will die. Another very toxic plant that you may find a weedy species is Datura. All right, I have it here, Datura metal. That is the botanical name for it. And that too causes, it has a number of hallucinogenic compounds in it. All right, this is a sacred plant for the Hindus. Another toxic plant is this one here, which is known as milkweed. And then we have this one here, which is Lantana camara. We use it a lot in ornamental horticulture. Weeds, in terms of other adverse effects, may have an adverse effect on our skin, for example. All right, some of them cause skin irritations. Very common weed is this here, Laportia estuens, which we know as stinging nettle. All right, and this is some of the problems it may cause, raising in the skin, and of course itching. Rhodbolia conscientiosus, which is corngrass, causes a similar problem in humans. Other weeds may cause allergies. And the weed that I showed you earlier, which was this one, the white top Parthenium hysterophorus, causes a number of allergies from the pollen, right? In India, annually, thousands of people die annually as a result of this weed. All right, it has never been determined if it causes any problem here in the Caribbean, but it is a severe problem in particular farming areas in India and in parts of Australia as well. But we have spoken so many negative things about weeds. What are some of the positive benefits of weeds? And there are several, all right? Because first to begin, a definition I didn't talk about in the earlier part of this discussion is the fact that weeds are plants whose virtues have not yet been identified, right? The term weed, according to the slide here, usually denotes an underutilized plant or a nuisance, but there are several uses that could be found. One use is that it provides food for humans and animals. Bagi, which is the botanical name for it, is Amarantha species, and Portulaca oleracea. I will show you pictures of it in a while. Right? They provide food for humans and animals. Some weeds could also be an important source of genetic biodiversity. All right, this is particularly so because there's one by the name of Solanum thorum, or Solanum strammonifolium. It is belongs to the Solanaceous family, and we actually use it to graft onto tomato and sweet pepper, and mainly tomato plants, to breed for resistance to certain pests and diseases. All right. Organic matter and nutrient cycling, it is also important for. This is particularly so for some low-growing leguminous type weed species. All right. And some weeds are also the host for beneficial insects. Timari, for example, and also wild Kariley. The flower attracts a lot of beneficial insects. All right. And some have medicinal properties. Most of them, and we will go through some of them in a while. Others have insecticidal properties, and some could be used in bioremediation of contaminated soils. Now, what are some of these common weeds, garden weeds, that we have around our yards that may be very beneficial to us? All right, so what I'll go through some photos of and tell you the common names, because it's important to know what are some of the weeds that you have in your backyard. All right, so this is wild hops. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with it. It's a low-growing plant, and sometimes very difficult to control, but hand pulling and the use of mechanical weed control sometimes will allow you to be able to remove it, okay? But it has some uses. It's used as a tea. A tea could be made from it to aid with stroke victims. Another common plant that we may have, and some of us may plant it as an ornamental, it's this one here. It's referred to as heartbush or mini root. Okay. Two other common ones that we have around our house. It's periwinkle. All right, but of course, this is a major landscaping plant. All right. But sometimes it may become weedy. It may become a little noxious because you didn't plant it and it just appeared there. All right, but you could use it as a tea for diabetes and hypertension. It is actually used in the pharmaceutical industry for the treatment of certain types of cancer, namely things like leukemia and those things. All right, very common one. This one is Bagi. We know it as Bagi, but it has some medicinal properties in addition to being used as food. And of course, you all know that this is very high in iron. The problem with Bagi it's a problem that it's common in most Bagi species, or Amarantha species as it's called, the botanical name. It has high oxalates or calcium oxalate, which may, if prolonged use, it become stones in your kidney. All right, so you have to avoid using it too much, but it is highly nutritious. It is an underutilized plant, and what you could do is to avoid it going into flowering, because this reduces the size of the leaves. All right, so keep pruning. If you plant it if you have it in your garden and you want to use it as a crop, keep pruning the flowers, because these flowers, once these go into and set seeds, what you find is that it will remain in the soil for a very long period of time. So keep cutting the flowers out, and it'll enable the leaves to grow much more and healthier as well. And then you could use those as food. But it has additional medicinal value in that it is used in the treatment of asthma and eczema. Now, in the class yesterday, somebody was asking about shadow benny. It mention was made of it and using it as, it could be blended together with some other natural repellents around the house to make an insecticide, a natural insecticide. All right, shadow benny, it's another name for it is culantro, not cilantro. Do not mistake it with the cilantro. This is a North American herb. We use it a lot here in Trinidad for seasoning, but on other Caribbean islands, it's not very much appreciated as a food. All right, but the roots are used, and know that for a fact in St. Vincent, the roots are used to make teas for the cold, common cold. All right, so they're using the treatment of a number of ailments such as fevers, chills, vomiting, burns, headache, hypertension, earache, stomachache, asthma, arthritis, even snake bite treatments, and scorpion stings. It's used to control diarrhea. Now, most of these uses, they have been scientifically documented. So I just put them together here just to let you know that a lot of the weeds have some kind of uses, or some kind of use, in fact. All right. Another one is this one here by the name of billy goat weed. All right, I have it in my backyard. It is a very prolific plant as well, and you'll see all these seed heads here. Sometimes it's a white flower, or sometimes it's a lightish purplish color, or sometimes a little pinkish color. All right, it is used to treat things like conjunctivitis, which is red eye, urine retention, diarrhea, bruises, and burns. And extractions of this oil from the leaves itself can be made into a natural insecticide. Then we have things like railway daisy. Railway daisy, it's a very common weed again that you will find around our yards. And in terms of medicinal use, an infusion of these leaves may be used as a tonic and for the treatment of diabetes. All right. And this one here, Congolala, the leaves may be macerated in coconut oil and used to promote hair growth. A black dye could be extracted from it to use to color the hair, and it's also used to treat snake bites. Inflammation bush or iron bush, this is another common one, and is used to treat malaria in India, right? And a number of other uses as well, and benefits. Last week, someone sent a picture of this one here on the Google Classroom site. And this is known as, it's a low-growing plant. It is very aggressive, and it covers the soil pretty nicely. I'm not too sure of any of its association with pests. All right, we have not determined whether it has any pests that may affect your crops. All right, so it is a good plant to probably encourage to avoid things like soil erosion taking place. All right, but the leaves and the young shoots can be eaten. It could be ground and boiled and filtered out and be used as a number of medicinal issues. All right, and back to this weed here, which we showed earlier, the white top, also known as whitehead, carrot grass, or bitterweed. Now, what I didn't mention to you about in terms of the aggressive invasive nature of this weed is the fact that one plant has the ability to produce as many as 100,000 seeds. And these seeds could remain, and it is a very persistent and I mentioned invasive weed species. These seeds could remain in the soil for several years. And when it remains in the soil is referred to as a soil seed bank. It could continuously grow for a period of time. what is significant besides of this weed, besides it being an allergen, is the fact that it produces some exudates. The leaves of this plant produces some chemical exudates that will prevent other plants from growing. That is referred to as allelochemical potential or allelopathy. All right. However, teas can be made from the leaves and used for colds, treatment of colds, and a decoction added to the bath water, and that could be used to treat things like skin rashes. There have been reports of insecticidal, fungicidal, and herbicidal, as well as nematicidal properties of the leaves in particular of this plant. Okay. I showed you earlier watergrass, but watergrass has this plant actually has about 120 different uses. I just mentioned a few here. It's used for the treatment of sore throat and conjunctivitis, red eye, and even the treatment of burns, but it is actually used as a farm and food in places like India and Philippines. There are reports where this purple color of the flower itself, they could extract dyes from it. All right. So there are a number of different uses for this in particular. Another common one is sweet willy, cypress vine. All right. Sometimes it is used as an ornamental in some instances, but usually it is because of its invasive nature, it has the ability to get away and become very problematic in some garden trees, like a citrus and some other things too. Talking about citrus, there's a particular weed by the name of bird vine that is very problematic and very difficult to control. All right, in terms of control, what we saw out of research at the University of the West Indies is that if you use something called, well, at least a 20% urea solution and you spray it on the citrus itself, it can actually desiccate or burn the bird vine from around the plant and makes it a little easier to remove. All right, another weed here is, these are actually little capsules that are produced from this plant. It's consumption weed or spider weed. All right, the leaves can be eaten or cooked and put into soups, added to soups, and it is used also in some African traditions to cure earache and deafness. Okay, very common one again is wild Corylea, or bitter gourd, bitter melon, it's referred to. It is used to treat a lot of feminine problems. Things like period pain and all those things. I can recall my grandmother using this, making a tea out of this for me when I was a teenager. So it is used for the treatment of itching, lice, boils, diabetes, hypertension, and actually this is commercially used. They actually make it a tea coming out of China for the treatment of hypertension, right? Rheumatism, worms, and the common cold. It also has some insecticidal properties as well. That is why it has to be boiled before it's used, because it has natural compounds in it that could become insecticidal, be used for insecticidal management. Another one is this spurge or milkweed, milkgrass in fact. It belongs to the family Euphorbiaceae, of which when you break the stem, you'll notice it oozes out something, a milk-like substance, all right? Even the ones that follow, the two species that follow, they belong to the same family. You have the beech spurge, and these could be very poisonous to animals, all right? But they have some medicinal properties as well, all right? So this one belongs to the same family as poinsettia, very common plant that we use around Christmas time. The leaves become a little red, of course, but they belong to the same family. Multiple uses here. All right, so quickly going ahead, timari, which is also known as sensitive plant. This, again, it is a leguminous plant. You'll notice that it has a very showy flower, all right? And this showy flower, this attracts actually foraging insects, honeybees and bees. And of course, because it's leguminous, it produces nitrogen fixing bacteria in the roots, all right? So, of course, that will enrich the soil. So it is used traditionally for the treatment of urogenetical disorders, piles, sinus, and even applied on wounds. Another common one, this actually produces a floral structure that could actually stick on your clothing. It's known as devil's horsewhip or man better man in some of the islands. It's an infusion of the whole plant, could be either mixed with timari and used for the treatment of colds. Timari, this one here, of course. Right, and then there's broomweed or broomstick. It actually, as the name suggests, it's actually used. The entire plant is used for as a broom in some countries. All right, we use it here in Trinidad. I have seen them use it as a broom. That's why they call it broomweed. But it has a number of other medicinal properties as well. Treatment of depression, bronchitis, wheezing, urinary tract infection, and the list goes on. Okay, very common one as well is this one, lion's ear or chandelier bush, or Christmas candlestick. Of course, we use it a lot for making teas for the treatment of fever and coughs. Now, even though Lantana camara is poisonous, it has some medicinal properties as well. This is again the same weed I mentioned to you all earlier. And it is used in landscaping as well. It was brought in to the Caribbean as an introduced species for landscaping. Similarly too, I'll give you a next example of a plant that came in as an ornamental and became very problematic, water hyacinth. It's a aquatic plant. I don't have a picture of it here, but it's an aquatic plant, and it came in here as a curiosity. Someone wanted to put it in a pond, they saw it in another country, and they brought it here, and incidentally just got away from flooding because of the seeds. It's an aquatic weed, so the seeds will of course be very buoyant and remain and go from place to place. So it spread throughout very quickly throughout Trinidad, and it actually clogs up at some point in time a lot of our waterways, like the Caroni River, for example, and a lot of water treatment plants, you could find it growing there as well. Very problematic weed. All right, so this one could be used, its bark is astringent and could be used as a lotion in skin problems, leprous ulcers, right? Also, extracts from the leaves have been found to lower blood pressure. Another very common one is stinging nettle. There are two species of stinging nettle. One has a purple stem and one has a green stem. I'm not too sure which one has more medicinal properties than the next, but it's a weed that you need to be careful with because it produces some fine hairs on the leaves itself that could cause itching, severe itching in humans. All right, but it has medicinal properties. It has been used for the treatment of hernias, fevers in children, ulcers, headaches, digestive disorders, urine retention, bedwetting, rheumatism, and a number of other treatments. And of course, as a food as well. Seed on the leaf, which is this one here. As you can see, on the underside of it, you have a row of seeds. This is used, a very common weed that I have known for liver problems, right? For the treatment of liver problems and gallstones. It's very common one as well, but it also has insecticidal properties. Purslane or hogbaji or pusley, as some people call it, a very succulent weed. very succulent plant, I should say, but it is highly nutritious. It contains more omega-3 acid, fatty acid that is, than other leafy vegetables and even some fish species. All right, so it is a good additive, and it is used as a pot salad as well. So it could be the leaves are actually, and the flowers could be used in salads and eaten fresh. Okay, contains a number of other dietary minerals such as magnesium, calcium, potassium, and iron. And it has been used traditionally for the treatment of insect or snake bites, boils, sores, and pain from bee sting. Vervine, very common one. I know it for a while now. I've heard of it being used, teas made from it to induce milking in nursing mothers. So extracts from this plant are used to the treatment of malaria, relief of fever, diabetes, and other liver disorders because it has a number of anti-inflammatory properties. I saw this picture, someone sent a picture of this particular weed last week in the Google Chat classroom as well, and this is known as shining bush. Shining bush. It has a number of medicinal properties, including the treatment of abdominal pains, abscesses, acne, boils, colic, and the list goes on, as well as lowering cholesterol. What I didn't mention before is that weeds can be classified differently. Weeds can be classified either as broadleaf plants or broadleaf weeds. You have also grasses and you have sedges. So those are the three major categories. You also have the ones that are parasitic and they grow on trees. All right, but the three major ones are the broadleaf ones, of which this belongs. Species like all these that I just dealt with, all these are considered broadleaf because they have a netted leaf venation. If you look at this leaf here in particular that I'm pointing with the pointer, it has a netted leaf venation. All right, these are referred to as broadleaf weeds. You also have grasses, and this is two common grasses that I mentioned. And the reason I put two of them side by side, they may not have as many medicinal properties as the others, but this is very common. It doesn't have any known medicinal properties, but it could cause mechanical injury. I put it together with this particular weed, which is known as purple top, which does incidentally have some uses in that it is used in the treatment of rheumatism, various skin disorders, and it possesses anti-diabetic and antibacterial as well as antimicrobial properties. Right, so yes, going back to the reason why I put two of these together. Sometimes weeds can be indicators of the condition of the soil. So if your soil is too acidic, you will see certain types of weeds persistent. These two weeds in particular are weeds that you could find in very acidic soils. All right, so it is an indicator. So if you see these, a lot of these in your backyard, that means you need to do some liming. All right, you could use some dolomitic lime or calcium based lime. You could get them at any of your garden shops. All right, so in the event you don't have anything to test the quality of your soil, you could just look at the actual vegetation, and that could tell you a lot of about the condition of your soil. So these are considered two grasses. And if you see the structure of these grasses, I don't have a picture. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture to show you the structure of it. It's much different to the sedges. Now, these are two very common sedges that you have. And this one in particular, the Cyperus rotundus, it is referred to as the world's worst weed. And you could differentiate a sedge from a grass in that sedges point in three directions and they have a smoother stem. Actually, the stem, it is smooth and triangular compared to the grasses that have a cylindrical hollow stem. All right, so you could go in your backyard and you could just do some little checks on both of them to see if you have any sedges or if you have any grasses in your backyard. So this one has a triangular solid stem, and the leaves point in 3 directions, and the others just don't have it, right? A hollow stem. Right, now the reason this is referred to as the world's worst weed is because of its difficulty to control. What additional feature does this have? Now, it doesn't have a very showy, pretty flower. That is because most of them are perennials. Most perennial weeds or plants do not have very attractive flowers compared to your broadleaf plants, which produce a very prolific. Remember, I mentioned they are prolific because most of them are annuals. They produce very pretty flowers that will enable them to set seed and set seed in abundance, right? So most of these are annuals, whereas most of the grasses and the sedges are perennials. They don't have very attractive flowers. As you see, this is not very attractive. It does not attract any insect that will pollinate it or cross-pollinate it, or cause whatever. All right. So this one, in addition to having flowers, which enables them to set seed, they don't produce as many seeds as the annuals, right? And because of that, they have an additional feature. I should have shown you a plant, the actual roots of this plant. The actual roots of this plant, and mentioning roots, I didn't mention this, but most of the grasses and the sedges have what is known as fibrous roots. The roots are very fibrous. But your broadleaf weeds, they have a taproot system. So that is a next way to differentiate between the 3 of them. Yeah, so going back to the roots of this that make it so noxious is the fact that it produces tubers. And those tubers can remain in the soil. So if I come here and I decide I'm going to use as my method of control a weed whacker, I'm going to hand pull it, physical mechanism of removal, it actually has rhizomes or tubers that remain in the soil. All right, so that I will try several different methods to control this, and I may not get any results at all. All right, and that is because it has this additional feature of vegetative organs, right? But the thing about it is that although it is noxious, it could be used as food in some countries. All right, for example, this yellow nutsedge, the tubers that are produced, you see they call it earth almonds or chufa. The roots can be parched and eaten, right? And this has been used. It is actually farmed in the Mediterranean. They farm this plant and they harvest the roots, and the tubers that are harvested, they are actually parched in some instances, or they make flowers out of it. When I talk about flour, I'm talking about this type of flour, not this type of flour. All right, Flour. And that flour is used to make other dishes. All right, it has been also found to have antioxidant properties. All right, so multiple uses for both plants. Now, how do we manage or control the weeds in our backyards? As I referred to as earlier, they are pests. They are considered pests, right? But there are multiple ways of controlling them, right? But what you want to adopt is what is known as an integrated weed management approach, right? In integrated weed management, we always use a chemical strategy as a last resort. So this is more of an environmentally or sustainable approach to managing your weeds, all right? Where you will adopt either a cultural management strategy, a physical management strategy, or you will use a biological, okay? But I want us to focus on at least 3 of them. All right, but your approach must be about 2 to 3 different ones. You're not going to focus on just one of the magic bullets, which is the chemical. Usually when a farmer sees a weed in his field, sometimes the first response is just to spray, all right, because he doesn't want it to become problematic. but it is also, you have to think in terms, because it's a sustainable management course, you have to think in terms of weeds being part of the agrobiodiversity. It is part of nature. So we just have to be able to manage it by simply manipulating, in some instances, the planting density. If you do so, it is referred to as cultural control, or by removing by hand, or if it's a weed whacker or rotary trimmer, through physical or physical or mechanical control. So cultural control is also referred to as managerial, all right, and physical or mechanical control. When we talk about chemicals, we talk about you have synthetic chemicals that are used. Those are most of your herbicides are referred to as synthetic, and then you also have non-synthetic. And I will show you some pictures of the differences in a while. All right, so last week, one of our speakers spoke about different types of mulches. Now, mulches could be considered either a part of the managerial control, or it could be considered part of the physical. All right, so there are different types. You have two types of mulches. You have the dead mulches or non-living mulches, and you have living mulches. So the speaker, he spoke about different types of mulches that could be used. So I just decided that I will show you some photos of the different types, the range of different types. Most of them are referred to as sheeted mulches. So you have things like a newspaper. Then he did mention the problem in newspaper is that you have to keep it moist all the time to allow it to remain on the soil. From the time it gets dry and the wind takes it, it will move from one place to the other very quickly. You have black polythene sheeting that could be used as well. And these could be applied by hand, or they could be applied by machines. All right. The speaker yesterday spoke about colored polythene sheeting, and that sometimes aids in pest management. Certain insects would not, they will try to avoid certain colors. Some colors they will be attracted to, others will repel them. All right, carpet is also used as well. Clear polyethylene or clear polythene sheeting could be used in some instances. But clear polythene has multiple purposes, and that clear polythene can be used in a process which is a hydrothermal process called soil solarization, where you use clear plastic on the soil for an extended period of time, say up to 6 weeks in full sunlight. And what happens is that it sterilizes the soil to some extent. It rids the soil of diseases, harmful diseases that may remain in the soil, and also harmful pests. All right, the eggs of certain pests. Even germinating weed seeds could be it could be stifled under this clear plastic, all right, so that it has multiple purposes. And of course, it suppresses, because what happens is that it creates what is known as a greenhouse effect, increases the heat and the temperature under this clear plastic. So the temperatures that you get under clear plastic is much higher than the temperatures that you will get under black plastic, right? Old carpet could be used, as I mentioned, and that is something that is common around the backyard. All right, geotextiles is the next one. And then you have this breedable weed mat. It is sold here for by the rolls. I don't know if I think it's about 100 feet, but it's very costly, about $3,000 for a roll. And of course, there are some types of paper mulches that can use for your vegetable production. Right? Now, besides the sheeted mulches, you have the particle mulches. So things like the industrial waste, the bagasse and all those things, they could be used to suppress weeds. Shredded and chipped bark could be used. The dangers in using the shredded and pitched bark and sometimes the wood mulch is the fact that you don't know where they're actually coming from, right? Things like cedar has those same compounds that the white top has, which is allelochemicals. And those allelochemicals will become very phytotoxic to the plant. And when that happens, it actually prevents the plants, good crop plants I'm talking about, from growing near it, or it may prevent the crop plant from uptaking certain nutrients into its growth and development. All right, crushed rock or gravel mulch is also used, as you can see in this picture here. Crop waste. I saw a participant send her pictures last week, and she showed her crop, and in between the crop she had this crop waste, a straw-like material. All right. The problem that you have to try to avoid there is that you don't want it to have seeds or flowers. Of course, they will get into the soil seed bank and become a problem. All right. So it has to be dry material that you're using to suppress the weeds. And of course, you have to make sure that when you're covering it, you don't put it too close to your crop plant, because sometimes that could have a pest and disease problems that will be later on a problem in your crop. All right, finer particles of wood could be used, and grass clippings, and straw and hay and all those things. So the particle mulches. So then there are other types of mulches, and these are examples of things that I used in some research I did in St. Vincent several years ago. Coffee hulls. Coffee hulls are very good for the soil, improving the properties of the soil in some instances. And it also has allelopathic compounds in it that will suppress nematodes. All right, banana mulch, another thing, clear plastic mulch. This is clear plastic mulch I use as soil for soil solarization, and black plastic. All right, so these are referred to as dead or non-living mulches. And then you have the living mulches. All right, living mulches. A typical example I like to show is this one here. This is Arachis pintoe. This is wild peanuts. All right, yes, it harbors things like nematodes, but it suppresses the soil quite nicely and runs over the soil. This is actually used in landscaping as well, but I use it in the islands for the management, as a living mulch for the management of weeds and bananas. All right. Most of your living mulches, or cover crops as they are referred to, they could be used as green manures, meaning that they could be mowed back into the soil and further enrich the soil. So the decaying residues sometimes inhibit weeds through allelopathic interactions, and even physical and biotic. All right, and there are some examples here. Desmonia heterocarpon, Mucuna pruriens, which is velvet beans, wild peanuts, and those things. So this is an example here of it. And you see how nicely it covers the soil, and it grows very, very abundantly and spreads very quickly. It's a prostrate plant, so that means that it's running and is low growing, very much so as the Arachis pintoe. Okay. Other strategies that I mentioned before, the cultural or managerial. Crop rotation is referred to as a managerial approach to weed management, because what you find is certain crops have certain weeds associated with it, and they have, of course, very similar life cycles. That is why in some instances they contaminate the crop seeds when you harvest them. All right, so to avoid that from happening, you want to rotate your crop. So this is an example of a rotation that can be used. 1 year you plant squash, followed by potatoes, followed by corn, followed by cabbage, followed by peas, tomatoes, beans, and root crops. And then you start the whole cycle over again. All right, so of course you'll have various things that you need to avoid. One being the fact that you want to avoid using crops of the same family. And I didn't do a lecture on crop families with you all, but I think I will do one just like how I'm doing this one here, pre-recorded, and then post it up in the Google Classroom on certain families, different types of families that should be avoided for the second and third planting. All right. So different planting and harvest dates prevents weed establishment. Of course, intercropping. So intercropping corn and beans, of course, they have different synergistic effects with each other. Of course, beans being nitrogen fixing, they could and grasses being heavy feeders of nitrogen. That is where you could plant them together, intercrop them together, and they will benefit each other. All right. Peanut and banana is the next grouping, and banana and beans. All right. Of course, in your backyards, your intercropping will be using a very let me see, not an integrated approach. The word is intensive. Word is intensive. You in your backyards, you want to practice some intensive gardening, where you're not giving the weed any opportunity to grow. All right, you grow your plants very close together, so you get as much benefit from a small area of land as you could possibly get. All right, so intercrops, what they do, they shade weeds. In terms of some physical or mechanical approaches that you could use, I wouldn't recommend this one in particular because it's very highly dangerous. There's a picture of me here holding what is known as a propane torch burner, and that is killing, it is beneficial mainly for killing isolated weeds. So you have a weed patch here, you want to get rid of it before it becomes a problem. You come and you burn it. So this is a tank you just you put on your back and you torch the plant, you torch the weeds. All right, but hand pulling, very common, and because it's a small backyard you may have, it is ideal to get your exercise, go out in the hot sun, get your exercise and hand pull. Or you could use secateurs to remove the weeds, or even based on the size of your yard, you use a rototiller. All right, not a rototiller, a weed whacker. All right. Now, I spoke earlier about when we looked at when I mentioned chemical control. I said that chemicals must always be avoided at all costs, especially if you want to be using it around the home. Now, I should have put an X over all these three because these three are referred to as synthetic herbicides. So you have different classes of herbicides, but you have the synthetic herbicides and you have the non-synthetic herbicide options. All right, so you should, of course, the last resort, if you have serious problems with weeds, you may have to eventually use some of these. Although a lot of our weeds now are developing a resistance towards most of the gramoxone and the Roundup. But let me tell you a few things about these chemicals, which are commonly used. Basta is referred to as a contact herbicide. So synthetic herbicides. Under synthetic herbicides, you have contact herbicides and you have systemic herbicides. The contact, as the name suggests, it kills on contact. And they're usually applied in the early morning when you have full sunlight. Or if you have any rainfall at all, it's going to affect it. So that is why our next contact here is the gramoxone. That is why, for example, this is called gramoxone super. It's called gramoxone super because it has an additional additive in it called a surfactant, all right, which will enable it to stay on the plant a little longer. So in the event you have rainfall, it will stick to the plant and it will enable it to it'll be activated. Usually contact herbicides, they kill on contact in about half an hour's time. You want to see some drying up, okay? So they kill on contact, right? But it must have full sunlight. On the other hand, the systemics now. So this one here, again, because it's called ultra, it has a surfactant, an additional compound that will enable it to stick on the plant. The Roundup now, you're going to see some type of activity in about 4 to 7 days. It's not right away. You're going to see a lot of farmers, what they like to do is to mix their chemicals together. They mix contact with systemic, waste of time. All right, so try to avoid, if you have to advise any farmer in your community about the use of pesticides, and tell them to avoid using cocktails where you combine contact with systemic because they'll just be wasting their pesticide, right? And as I said before, use as a last resort and always avoid as they are unsafe for use around the home. Now, although they may not be available, there are non-synthetic herbicides which are made out of natural compounds that could be used. You could actually make your own herbicides, all right, using things like vinegar. Okay, these are commercial brands that I got out of North America, and they are actually certified OMRI, certified for use in organic farming. All right, but they contain natural compounds, and these include things like acetic acid, citric acid, clove oil, cinnamon oil, lemongrass oil. All right, those are some of the major compounds that you find in them. All right, so these are some examples: burnout, skeet, eco-exempt, bioorganic, and matron. Okay, so I want to thank you all for listening, and if you all have any questions, you all could post it up on the Google Classrooms. All right, so again, thank you.